Good morning, we're back. Sew Together Tuesday. Wait a few minutes, as usual. Some people get here, and then we're going to talk again. So we're back. I'm Teresa Coates. I'm the National Educator for Shannon Fabrics, and today we are back for Sew Together Tuesday. Last week we had our Cuddle, or our Kids Cuddle Camp, I guess we called it, and we did 3 kids projects last week that were specifically projects that were made specifically for children to do, and they were super fun. We made a little travel pillow, we made a mood pillow, which was my favorite, and a little brekkie bag with a little Pop-Tart. So if you missed those last week, those are the projects we did Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of last week, and they were super fun, and we did those with the Quilt Cadets patterns. But this week we're back with, I guess, grown-up sewing classes, and we're going to be doing our Sew Simple blanket, which is this pattern here. Okay, so this is a pattern that we have. It's a free download on our website. So if you are interested in making this pattern, it's a super easy, I'm sure Ellen will post the link for it, super easy blanket. All it is really is 2 pieces of fabric with a binding. Okay, simplest blanket ever. Well, maybe the throw where we just have the 2 pieces of fabric, that might be the easiest. But this one is comparably easy. Okay, super great little blanket that we're going to do today. So the fabric that we're going to use today is one of our newer fabrics. It's one of our Heroes version. This is the Nurse. I don't have the other ones, but you can see them on our website. We have some different variations. Super cute. So if you have a nurse in your life, this is the print to get for them. It's really adorable. The motifs are just super cute. And Ellen, I'm sure, can post the link for the other ones too. And this one, I have seen some people make it, so it's available in stores now. Okay, so I chose this on one side, and then I chose one of our new batiks on the other side. So it's not actually a real batik, it's like a faux batik. But I chose that to go on the reverse side, which I really love. And these are new as well. Okay, so the blanket is really super simple. Like I said, 2 pieces put together, we're going to bind it. We're going to walk through the whole thing today, and I'm going to show you a couple of different variations on things that you could do. Is the light being weird? Okay. There we go. Okay, so I'll show you a couple different variations on how you can not necessarily put them together, but some changes that you could make to suit you a little bit better, and we'll talk about that as we go. Okay, so this is what we're making. I'm doing a small one. This is one of those blankets that you can do whatever size you want to. This one, let me see, is about 29, which means I cut the yard in half. Let's see what this is. I cut this a little bit shorter, I think by 30-ish. Yeah, so it's slightly rectangular, but not too much. Okay, super cute little blanket though. Okay, so this is a nice little easy throw. You could do this with a yard, and then your blanket would be about 29, 30 by 35 or so. Okay, all right, so let's get the fabric. So I'll put this to the side. We'll get our fabric and start working with it. So as usual, please tell us where you're from. Tell me your favorite quilt shop. Tell me your favorite new print, whatever you want to tell me, okay? If you comment, you will be entered to win a prize at the end, which will be a kit to make this blanket. So I will give you this fabric, and this fabric, okay? And you can make your own version of this, okay? So that's what we're gonna do. All right, so what I've got is, like I said, I've got my batik and my faux batik. And I've got the little nurse print. And the only thing I need to do is get these together and in the same size. So one of the things that I like to do is to spray base them together first. So you do not have to spray base them. You could just pin them. But for me, it's easier if I spray base them together, then I cut them out. Okay, and then I can get it to be the right size. And if I wanted to, I could use batting in there, and I'll show you in a little bit what you can do with that. But really, it's just the 2 pieces, and then when you wash it, it comes apart. So this one, I actually sent it in the wash, and so this one has been washed and dried. Okay, so you can see how this hangs and hangs together. Okay, but you can also see that it's not quilted at all on the back. Okay, it just sticks together. So I can actually take these and pull them apart. Okay. So they will pull apart, ta-da, okay, but they hang really nicely together. So they just go right back, all right? So super duper easy, and it doesn't matter if you use basting spray or no, except for when you're cutting it out, okay? There was something else I was going to tell you about I like to do it when I do these blankets with the So Simple blanket. I like to do it so that both sides are basically the same weight of fabric. So those are both 2 digital cuddles. And so I would do like the flat cuddles on both sides, or on one of them I did a cuddle on one side and a hide on the other. But what happens if your fabrics are too different of weights, the one will want to pull away more. So using the same fabric or very similar weights of fabric will keep them together a little bit better. Okay, so there's a little inside scoop for you. All right, it's the same weight fabric is better to use. So don't use a really heavy one or a stretchy one on one side and a light one on the other. Okay, all right. So the first thing I'm going to do is move some of my stuff out of the way. Okay. And I did not get my sheet washed, and so I don't have a sheet to throw down. So we're just going to do this. I'm going to be real careful, and then I'll clean my board later. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I would put out my sheet. Okay. I'm going to lay my fabric flat together. Okay. This is kind of an easy print to use because it's got these grids in it. The thing that I noticed is that when mine got cut, it didn't get cut necessarily at the top. So like on this one, you can see this design got sort of chopped off. So I'm actually going to use this as my top line. Okay. So I would assume that in the stores, they'll probably cut it along those lines, but that's how mine is. So I'm going to work with that. That'll be my top. Okay. That was why mine was shorter before too. All right. I'm going to get a little something. It's actually just another piece of fabric that I don't care if I spray the back of it. I'm going to put it under here so that when I spray, I'm not spraying the front of my fabric because I don't want to spray the right side. Okay, so I'm going to put this here so I can spray, and I'm going to be real careful and try not to spray off the sides too much. Okay, I can just wash it off the board. So when I'm done here, I'm just going to get a warm water and some soap, wipe down my board, and it'll all be good. Okay, so today I'm using the 505 spray as I always use because I love it. And we're just going to spray the back of this, and then we'll put it together. Okay. All right, and if you have any questions, please ask. Again, this is the 505 spray. It's from O'Deef. Most quilt shops have it. There's definitely a difference between basting sprays. Okay, so if you have used other sprays and you don't like them, I will tell you to give this one a shot because it is less stinky, like not stinky at all in my opinion, and washes out really nicely. Okay. The biggest thing is like the basics. I can't
smell it, and I'm right here.
Yeah, they tend to be really stinky, and this one is not at all. Yeah. Yeah, and if you can't smell it, you're a foot away. Yeah, I really like it. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to keep spraying the back of it, and I'll roll it out. Okay, so I'm just spraying a little bit. So you probably can't see, but I'm not pushing the whole thing down really hard. Okay, I just spray just a little bit, and get it on here, and then I'm going to roll it out. So this is the trick, is that I put my hands underneath here, and then I sort of roll it out. Okay, I say that it's a trick after it. I just pulled my hands out once, and then it got sticky. Okay, so the trick is to get your hands under it and roll it out. Okay, get that up there. All right, and I'm going to roll it out some more. There we go. Okay, so then I can get it pretty flat, get in here, make it stick, okay, because it won't really stick too much unless you kind of smack it. Okay, and we're only going to have it so it holds for right now. It doesn't need to be glued down really hard, so this should work just fine. Okay, so if I were being really careful, I would make sure that my line was not going to go past there. I would have laid it out better. But I'm just doing it quick, so that's the way it is. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing. So I stick my hands under here and push that forward. If you've ever been in a class with me, we call swimming it. You're gonna swim it up. Okay. And that's all we're doing is just pushing that up. Okay. And I could see this got off more than I wanted to, so I may go back and fix it. We'll see. Okay, so what I was saying is I can see that this goes over quite a ways, so I'm actually going to pick this up and I'm just going to refinagle it. So that's one of the great things about this 505 spray is that I actually can lift it up. So even after I've tacked it down with the little slapping bits, I can actually pull it back up and get it to be where I want it to. So I'm going to do that and reposition it so that it doesn't come off the side quite as much as it did. Okay, that's because I wasn't careful and I didn't realize we had a pretty good selvage there. Okay. So because this is small enough, I can do this. It's a lot easier. If I were working with, you know, a huge piece, this would not be quite as simple. Okay. Get that to go back. All right, and then I'll just even up the sides a little bit better. All right. Okay. And because it already has a little bit of the sticky on it, I don't actually have to spray it again, which works out nicely. Okay. Okay. All right, so now I've got it all stuck back on there. It's a little straighter. I feel a little better about it now. Okay, so now the two will work together just as one piece, so then I can cut them. Okay, after I cut it, if I feel like they're kind of falling apart a little bit, you can spray just a little bit more. But really, once I've gotten them together and I stitch the binding on, it doesn't matter if they come apart at all. Okay, so once I've gotten these two tacked together, then I need to cut this into the right shape. Okay, so I left it, obviously, the back one bigger than the front. What you could do is you could do where you would cut the size and then try to get the two sizes to match. But for me, that would be crazy making. So what I like to do is cut out one side, put them together, then cut the final size. If you were specifically making, like you wanted to make one that fit, I don't know, a specific thing, and you needed exactly that size, cut the one side that size, then put it onto the back and then cut them to match. Okay, don't try to cut both of them to the exact size and get them to match together. It will make you crazy trying to get them to line up. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim this all off. Okay, do we have any questions there? Is everybody doing all right?
Everybody's doing okay.
Okay.
Very happy that we can reposition.
Okay. The reposition light?
No, with the
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it works so well. I really, yeah, there's no like, oh, you messed that up, you're stuck with it now. So one of the things too with this print and with some of the other ones is that you could actually cut this so that you had your seam allowances on here. Because mine is so narrow, I'm not going to do that. But if I had like the whole width of the yard, what I could do is I could take it and I could mark my 1/2 inch. I could cut it at a 1/2 inch, and then my seam allowance would be right along that line. Okay, that would be a really easy way of doing that. I don't have a big enough one that I want to cut off to here because I have to cut off of each one of these, but I will do it on the top and the bottom so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so all I'm doing is lining up the 1/2 inch line on my ruler with the line of the fabric. Okay, so the design is a straight line all the way across, so I'm just using that as my guide. Okay, so this side I just cut it off straight because that's all I had. Okay, and then I'm just going to reposition my ruler here, slide it down, make sure that I am going to keep going exactly on that same line, make sure that it's still at a 1/2 inch, and cut it the rest of the way. Okay, that worked really well because this wasn't a full square, so I wouldn't need that anyway. So now I can just chuck that guy. Okay, so then I'm going to turn it. And you can see this is the C3, so it leaves a little bit of a mess, but it's really not too bad. So we'll be able to kind of shake that off. We'll give it a little vacuum. Okay, so it's nothing like the Luxe Cuddles. All right, so if you're afraid of working with the Cuddle Minky, just make sure that you are, oh, that back one is cut so bad. Okay, then this one I'm actually gonna take this one shorter too. Okay, and that's because this is so far off that this is more than a 1/2 inch difference here. So this is how I figure out what I can do with it, is because, and then I'm like, okay, so this part matches, it's a little bit off, it's within the 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's totally fine. And then I'm like, oh, this got really crooked. So I can't hide this in my 1/2 inch seam allowance. I would be fighting it too hard. So I'm just gonna take this side off and give this the 1/2 inch seam allowance too. So we'll actually just have one side that's a little short, which I wouldn't suggest you do it that way, but then you guys can see what difference it makes in the end when we do that, when we give it the little 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay.
We did not put any batting in this.
No, I did not put any batting. So one of the things about this is that it's a really nice weight. So this, you can't really see the weight, but you can see that it's not super floppy. Okay. So it has a little bit more, oh, what is the right word? Like it'll wrap around you really nicely. So really good for that sort of thing. Like you can, you could wrap it around you at a sports event or anything like that. Not that we're going to sports events right now, but you know. You can wrap it around you, it'll lay across your lap really easily. Super floppy.
Watch a drive-in movie.
You can watch a drive-in movie, that's right. But when you're sitting on the couch or whatever, it's got a really nice drape. Okay, so I like it for that. I'll show you in just a minute. I did put batting in one. It just makes it a lot stiffer, and if you put batting in it, you have to quilt it. So the nice thing about this is that you don't have to quilt it, and that's only because it doesn't have batting in it. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna do the same thing on the bottom because I've got two different levels that do not match. So I'm gonna do the 1/2 inch here too. Okay. Get my fabric nice and straight, and then just match up my 1/2 inch here right along that edge. And so where it doesn't match, I'm just going to pull it up, make it match, pull it back, make it match. Okay, give myself a 1/2 inch all the way across. Just use my rotary cutter, and I'll reposition it and cut the rest of it off. Okay. All right, and then I have my last side, and this is the side that I didn't have any extra to leave that 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I'm just going to cut it off right with the edge of it and just straighten it up. Okay, so I'm going to use my edge that I cut here. I'm going to match it with this right here because I can see where the corner of that box is basically. So I'm going to aim for that. Okay, you can also get this line lined up. So the grids that are on this print are actually super helpful. Okay, if you're using one that doesn't have the lines on it, what you'll want to do is actually like carefully measure it out and make some marks on it. Like we've done before, you can actually make lines on it with your stiletto, and you could show where your marks where it needed to match, and then they'll totally go away. Okay, because you're just marking on the top, and that would be how you could mark your, like if you were doing 30 inches or 48 inches or whatever. Okay, just mark that with that, because we can't mark on the back of it right now. Okay, all right, so we have a skinny little blanket. It's cute. Okay, got it all cut out, hanging together. Okay, to give it a good little shake over here. Get the little bit of cuddle dust that wants to come off of there on there. So now I've got this, and I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to cut the binding. Okay, so let me show you really quick the one that I did with a little bit of quilting. So this is another print that we had, or we have right now. It's one of the military prints that we have. So this is another one that has the little squares on it that's not quite the same. That was very even squares, and these are all different sizes and shapes. But I just quilted around these. I have batting in it. I have the polyester Quilter's Dream Poly Request is what's in here. Really nice light batting. And then I just quilted around the different squares. Okay, and then that's what it looks like on the back. Okay, so super nice. I just did a little bit of it this morning just so I could show you guys. It adds dramatically to the weight. So even though this isn't bound, you can see like the drape is kind of completely gone in it because of the batting. So when you compare the two, this has batting and this has none. The drape is drastically more here. Okay, so this will add more visual interest because of the quilting. It'll add some weight to it if that's what you want. This will give you the drape that if that's what you want. Okay, so you could do it either way. That's the difference. All right, but it is really cute with the if you can follow those designs. So if you were using a print that didn't have any sort of grid work on it, I probably would never think about actually quilting it. Okay, there's the other piece. It's like there was something else I needed. Okay, so here's my blanket. Now I'm going to do my binding. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I do this. So my favorite bindings for this one is a marble, which I really like. I really like hide, which I'll show you too. This is a hide. And we mentioned these in the blog post. So there's a blog post that talks about a lot of them, a lot of tips that I'm going to talk about today. So these are the three that I like to use for binding. And the reason I like to use them is because the designs kind of go different directions. So I'm not kind of fighting the nap of the fabric for the binding, okay? It doesn't matter which way the binding goes. It'll be totally fine because the nap is going all the different ways. Super pretty, okay? So marble, hide, and heather are the ones that I like best for that. So this is a marble we're going to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it at 1 3/4 inches. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I cut it. So I'm just going to line it up along here. So I look at the back of my ruler. I hope you guys don't get too much of a glare there. So I just look at my ruler, the 1 3/4 inches. So here's 1 inch, then I go up 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. Okay, I do what I mark it heavy. So you can see that my fabric comes just out the other side of that little yellow line. Okay, so that way it's just slightly more than 3/4 of an inch. Okay, and then I'll just come along here. I'll get it so it basically is that the whole way. And then I'm going to mark it, if I can find my silver Sharpie. Okay. Okay, so there I've got a mark. Now I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to move this. You probably won't be able to see this as well as I can. But I'm going to move it so that my 1 3/4 mark matches under there. I'm going to mark it again. Okay. Okay, some people do these and they prefer 2 inches, but I found that 2 inches I often end up getting a little bit of a floppy thing over at this side, for lack of a better word. So I try to avoid that. I do 1 3/4. Okay. But I do a little bit of a scant 1/2 inch, so closer to a 3/8. We'll talk about that more when I'm sewing it. Okay, but in the pattern it tells you 1 3/4. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. Get it to line up. Follow that line. Mark another line. Oops. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing. And your line may not be the straightest line you've ever seen. And that's okay. We'll be all right. Just get it fairly even. Okay, it definitely takes some practice. Okay, you can definitely cut this with a rotary cutter. Okay, I like to measure it out first and then cut it for a couple of reasons. One, it's really easy for my rotary to slip. So especially when you're dealing with a long rotary, it's really easy. Because this is a knit fabric, you can see how easy it slides on the back of this. Is that if I'm cutting, it's super easy for it to do this or this as I get to the end, and then my strip isn't straight. So if I have it where I've drawn the line first, I can visually follow that line and make sure that if it's starting to get off a little bit, I know to pull it back and fix it before I get there. If I don't have that line, it's really easy for it to get off a little bit and I don't realize it. And then this one and this row are both the wrong size now. Okay, so there's partly, that's one reason. The other is I like to cut it with the blade because it's less messy. We found the blade, there it is. Okay, so this is the way I like to cut it just because it's less messy. What I do is I hold a piece here, I hold it, keep it taut, and I'm just going to drag it along the back of the fabric right along that line. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to pull it right along here and it just separates. And then what happens is all of this nap stays on the fabric more than falling off. So some of it will come off, but most of it will stay on there. Okay, so that's a double duty thing, as it's less mess for me now. It also means that I have more nap to kind of hide all of my stitches with. Okay, so it makes it so that you don't see the edge so well, which can be a little bit intimidating when you're sewing it, but you'll get used to that. But it does make it so you have lots of fuzz to cover any crooked stitches. So then nobody knows that it wasn't perfect. Okay, and you can see I just sort of check it as I go, make sure it opens up. I can go back and cut any of those threads or fibers, I guess, that get stuck in between. It's like in between, sometimes they'll be like that. And I can go back and cut them. Okay, so I'm just going to cut all the way along this. This is the SAC-1 blade from Olfa that I really like. This is the other one that they've sent me. That is also an Olfa. I was trying to see if there was a number on it. This one's pretty cool because it comes with this cute little stand, so you can just pop it right in there and not lose it. Okay, super cute. And this one has the little safety bit. So the only part of the blade that's showing is that little bitty bit. Okay, whereas this one, you've got a whole lot of blade hanging out. So I'll show you. This one will cut just as well. Okay, or it should. I used it this morning and it did. Yeah, see. So when this, like, it looks like it probably needs to be broken. Okay, then I could just take that off. And now I broke the plastic more than I was supposed to. Darn it. Oh yeah, that cuts a lot better now. Okay, so there's probably a way to clip that off that wasn't the way I just did it that was better. Okay, but I really like the way this knife works. It's kind of, a lot of the things with the tools I've realized is it really is about your own personal handhold and what you like and what you're comfortable with. I know, I talked with Linda, one of our BAs, and brand ambassadors, and she doesn't really like using this knife because she doesn't like pulling toward her. So she likes to push away, and so she uses a Chenille Cutter, which works well for her. I feel like I have more control with this, so really it's to each their own. Like I said, you absolutely can do this with a rotary cutter too. You just end up having a little bit more mess. And when I say a little bit, I really mean quite a lot, just so you know. Just so you're prepared, all of this stuff will be floating around your sewing room. So any of the extra that you see hanging off the side here, that's what gets cut. So if you've ever, you know, we don't really wonder why it makes such a mess, but that's really what it is all of those fibers get cut and then they float around. Okay, so the less we can cut them, the better.
Can you talk about you use the silver Sharpie for this dark fabric because it's easy to see.
Yep.
What would you recommend when marking the back of light fabric?
I also, if you're going to use like a white or yellow, I would recommend using the silver as well because you'll be able to see it on there. I often will use black, but I will use a finer one, or you could just use a regular ballpoint pen. So I have one that we did last time. So here's just a regular ballpoint. Okay, let me see if I have, oh, here it is. A light scrap here. Okay, so this one will work just fine, and then it won't be so bold. So that one works, it's just wider. And then black will work totally fine, but it ends up being wider. And so when I'm cutting it, if I'm using, what did I do with this pen? If I'm using this pen and I draw a line, this is a pretty narrow line that when I cut it, I will cut 90% of the ink off. When I use this one, I have to make sure that I'm cutting so that I'm actually cutting off the Sharpie, because this will show, especially when you bring it around and you use that raw edge to stitch down the binding, which I'll show you. This will peek out, is that dark fabric or the dark ink. So yeah, so using a ballpoint pen is kind of my favorite, or using the silver Sharpie for the light fabrics. Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you. Yeah, that makes a difference, because on this one, and so it works the same way with the self-binding blanket, because the edges of it show. So if you're going to do something that has the raw edge, you got to think forward just a little bit to figure out, like, okay, what's going to show? And if I draw it here, or if I cut it here, is that going to show? Will I be able to cut it off? Okay, all of that is important to kind of think through just a little bit. Okay. So yeah, on any of the like mid-tone fabrics, like any of the red or the lighter blues or greens or anything like that, the black isn't going to show up. It'll be totally fine. Okay, so now I've got that. Okay, so you can see the amount of mess that I have after cutting that is really pretty darn minimal. Okay, so I'm going to get off the rest of it. I'm going to give it a little bit of a shake. Okay, and we'll get the loose bits off of it. Okay, but comparing it to when you cut with a rotary cutter, it's crazy. So when I'm doing this, what I would recommend is that when you get to this point that you do the dryer trick and you throw it into the dryer with a wet washcloth, let it tumble around for a couple minutes, you'll be good. Okay. And it needs just a couple of minutes in there. Oh, sorry. I have to clean up my mess. Hold up. Okay.
Because it's a knit fabric, you don't want to stretch it along the long.
Right. Right. You don't want to pull it. So that tends to be what people want to do, is that they want to pull all of these edges off. But if you do that, it curls the fabric. And then it makes it more difficult to do what we're going to do. Okay, so don't curl the fabric like that.
Also, what was that vacuum cleaner?
Oh, everybody wants to know about the vacuum cleaner. Yeah. It is my favorite. I have 3 of them. I love them. It's a 16-volt max lithium Black & Decker. Yeah, at some point, I really need to do that too. I've had a few people ask, is I need to I'll do a little blog post about it on my own blog, just to show you guys so I could send you there and be like, it's that one, go buy that one. It's really good. It retails, I think, around $50, $60. I have had the ones that I got when I started working for the company, so almost 4 years ago, and they're still working fine, except for the one that got dropped. And it still works. It's just taped together. So, but they work really, really well. And we've talked about it before, but I'll mention just really quick. The thing that I like best about it is that the air blows out the booty, okay, instead of the side. So a lot of the hand vacs, the air blows out this way, which makes it messier to clean up than blowing out the booty. Okay, all right, there. I swear, Black & Decker should send me vacuums. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, all right, but the ones I have still work. I don't need any more vacuums. That's totally true. Okay, so now we're going to sew our binding strips together. So I've got 2 strips. I just realized I might need 3, and I threw my other piece away. This will teach me. It's because I was thinking about something else. Okay, so I've got my binding strips. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this out. Okay, what I'm going to do is measure all the way around it and see if we can fit. So if I can fit this halfway, oh, it's so close. Okay, we're going to give it a shot. This might actually work because look, I have a whole 4 inches, you think? 4 inches extra over there.
So binding chicken?
Yeah, we're going to play a little binding chicken. Let's see what we can do. Because I don't want to cut another piece if I don't have to, because it'll be for 6 inches. So you should probably measure yours first. Measure all the way around, and then what I like to have is about a foot extra, at least, so 12 to 18 inches extra, so that I have that extra. So now I'll have 8 inches, so half of what I really want, but we're going to give it a try. And really that just gives you enough that you can do that overlap at the end to bind them together. So I'm going to sew these together so that I have one very long strip of binding, okay? So I can sort of see a nap happening here, okay, just a little bit. I'm going to lay it out so I can make sure. So it looks to me like it's coming more this way, and this one is coming more this way. So I'm going to find the other end and lay them together and see if I feel the same way about it. Yeah, it definitely feels like it goes that way a little bit more. So I just want these to go the same way if I can. If you can't tell the difference, it doesn't matter. Okay, that's my theory on it, almost always. All right, so I'm going to stick these on there. And what I do is I overlap them. I leave the selvages on, I overlap them and let the selvages hang off the edge. Okay, they're fine. I'm going to cut them off in just a minute. Okay, so now I'm just being careful because I didn't move my red fabric. Trying to catch, yep, both layers. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sew from one corner to the other. Okay, so similar if you're, I always want to say a real quilter. It's not really what I mean. But if you're a quilter, you know how to do these bindings like this. Okay, so here's my corner where they meet. Okay, where I can see this one comes here, this one comes here. There's my corner, and there's my corner. And I want these two to meet up. So I'm just going to draw a line. Okay, so that it's easy enough for me to follow. All right, you do not have to draw the line, but it does make it easier when you're learning how to do this. Okay, so now we're going to come around, and I've got the machine set up. I just replaced the needle this morning so that we have a nice fresh needle in there today. I've got my gray Superior threads, the So Fine, because I love gray. And then we're just going to use a straight stitch on a 3.5 stitch length. So one of the tricks that I like to do is that I like to put my needle down, and then I put my fabric up to it. Okay, so this is where I need to start sewing, is on that little gray line. So I'm going to bump that gray line right up to my needle, put it down, and then I'm going to sew. Okay, I'm going to sew forward a little bit. I'll sew forward, backward, because I want to lock that, because that's going to get some wear. I'm going to move that needle because the flower head was going to get sewn over, and I didn't want to do that. Okay, so now I sewed right over where I drew the line. I can check, make sure that this works. Sure enough, it will become a straight line. So now I'll take it over here and chop the end off. Okay, so what I do is I just chop it. Okay, no need to measure it. It should be 3/8 to a 1/2 inch-ish. Okay, the thing you don't want to do, oops, you should probably get it straight-ish. You also want to not cut it too short, because what will happen is that these edges will curl. So you can see, even with just the cutting it, how much the nap will come off. So I always recommend, you know, cut that over the trash can. Ta-da! All right. So now I've got it like this. So now I've got a situation where I can use my little stiletto and I can pull all those fibers up out of that seam, and suddenly the seam is gone. All right, so now we can sew it all the way around. All right, so what I like to do is I sew it to the back, bring it around to the front, and then we're going to machine stitch it down. Some people do it opposite. I have a really hard time getting it to line up perfectly, so, and maybe I shouldn't say a really hard time. I don't do it perfect, and so I do it so I can stitch from the front where I can see it a little bit better. But it's really up to you. I suggest that you do it from the back to start with. Okay, and then bring it around to the front. So we're going to want a little bit of a tail, and I'm going to leave not too long of a tail because I didn't leave myself too long of a tail. Okay, and what I want to do is when I'm putting this on here, I want to make sure that it's going to come around and it's going to flop down in front. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this over here. This is only being pinned in place. It's not where I'm going to start sewing. Okay, I'm going to start sewing over here because I want to leave myself a bit of a tail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that these raw edges match. So even though I have all of that fluff up there, I want the raw edges to match. So that's what I'm looking at, is trying to get those to match. Okay, and that just kind of takes a little bit of eyeballing, but if I feel it, I can feel the edges are all flat together. Okay, you can sort of see that. Okay, so the raw edges will match. Okay, and I'm just going to put a few little clips in here. So one of the things that you want to make sure when you're doing this is that you're not stretching this and then pulling it down. Okay, because one, you can see it curls, and two, when it contracts after it's sewn in, everything will contract. Okay, so if you're not very careful about it, what happens is you end up with a bowl for a blanket instead. Okay, so we want to make sure that these are just being laid down nice and evenly. We're going to clip it, and the clips are going to move as we go. All right, do not try to clip the whole thing. This is about, usually what I do is I start the middle of one side, I sew to the end, and then I'll keep clipping. So I don't do the whole thing. I don't even do a whole side at one time. I just do a little bit at a time. All right, so today we're going to use my favorite tool again. It's the By Annie Stiletto. Okay, I love this tool. I know a bunch of you have it now. Super good, has this nice point that's sandblasted, so it's got some roughness to it, which is great. Has these flat edges so it doesn't fall off your table. Okay, I really love this guy. So you'll see how I use that when we're doing this. So we're gonna do the same thing, straight stitch. We're gonna go all the way around this baby. Okay, so binding with Cuddle is actually easier than a lot of people think it is. It's not too difficult, it just is a different beast. So you're gonna use some of the techniques that you use for regular quilt binding and then some new techniques. All right, so what I want to do is make sure that my edges are matching. Okay, so I can sort of see under there. Okay, and I'm going to stitch this at, this ends up being my 3/8. A 1/2 inch is really here, but I aim for this one instead. Okay, and that's just, it seems to work better for me. All right, so I'm going to push this back just the tiniest, sorry. Okay, and I'm going to back stitch here. Okay, and I'm going to keep an eye on this so that my edge is basically matching. Okay, I'm going to keep it straight through, and you're going to see I'll just sew a little bit at a time, and then I'll check. And it's going to push forward a little bit, and I don't really care. I just want to make sure it doesn't go too far.
When you started this binding, how much tail would you have ideally wanted to leave?
Ideally,
if you weren't playing chicken?
It would be about 8 to 10 inches is what I leave. And then when I get around to the other side, I've got plenty of room to play. Okay, and the reason too that I shoot for this line is that if it gets a little bit off, I'm still within my 1/2 inch. If I'm shooting for this line and it gets a little heavy, I have less than a 1/2 inch, and then it's really hard to manage. Okay, so I'm going to get down here, and then about a 1/2 inch from the end, I'm going to stick a little pin in. Okay, and I'm just going to eyeball this, because I've seen a 1/2 inch a lot. Okay, and I'm going to get down here and go nice and slow. Go one more stitch. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to pivot this whole thing until my point is coming off the front. Okay, then I'll lay this back in place. So I still want this whole line to go straight. Okay, but that corner is going to come right off the front. Put my foot back down and sew off the corner. Okay, and I'll clip my thread. Now I'm going to take this out, and then I'll redo the next section. Okay, so these stitches here, I'm going to put my fingers here so you can see how big these stitches are. Okay, so in comparison, these are nice big stitches. These are great. Okay, this is what you want, is a nice big stitch. You do not want them to be teeny tiny little stitches. One, if you have to take it out, it's a huge pain. Two, there's no need for it to be a tiny stitch. It will hold just fine. Okay, so it makes it all easier. Okay, so now here's the trick. And so if you've done this with cotton binding, you know how to do it. If you're new to it all, it can get a little crazy. So I've got my tail. Okay, I've got my place where I've stitched off the corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my hand here, and I'm going to bring my tail up. Okay, so you can see that the tail is now turning, and it turns right on that 45-degree line that I stitched. Okay, so I'm going to keep this here. Now it goes straight up the side. You see that? Let me see if I can move my binding. So you can see it goes straight up the side. That's what I want, is for this to continue. And then I'm going to put a finger here, and I'm going to bring this back down. I'm going to pinch it and get that in place. Okay? So we'll do this 3 more times. So by the end, you'll have this. Okay? Then I'm going to hold it here. So what I want here is these raw edges to match. So I've got 2 layers of raw edges here, because they went up and then back down. And then here's my fold, and my fold ends just before the raw edge. Okay, if this fold goes over your raw edge, you're going to end up with a little pocket at your corner. And we want a nice, tight little corner there. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to put one more pin in here. So when I get started, it's holding it in place. Okay, so now I've pinned it in 2 places that when I stick it into the machine, neither of these pins have to come out. It's going to hold it exactly where I want it for this corner. Then I can start sewing and take the pins out. Okay, so now we'll take it back to the machine and sew along that side. So I want to remember that we're sewing here. Okay, we already sewed this side, so you're never going to sew across this. Okay, we're just sewing down just down this side. Okay, so let's do that. And like I said, we'll do this a few more times. You'll figure it out. So this is definitely one part that gets a little bit confusing for people. Okay, so I'm going to start in just a little bit. so that I'm not trying to feed up over that lump. And I'm going to keep my stiletto here because I might have to guide it just a little to get it moving. Okay, because that's a lot of hump and dump right there to get over. So this pin here, I want to take this out after I've gotten this sewn in this far. I want to take it out because it is one place that I have found that I will grab that section and then stab myself really hard. So I'm going to try to avoid that. No bleeding on Sew Together Tuesday. Okay. Now I'm going to put a couple of clips in here and I'm just going to keep moving these down as I go. Okay, so I've got my edge. You can see that pretty okay. I'm just going to run it right along here. And I'm just keeping an eye on this edge. Okay, and I'm going to keep a hand back here and kind of guide it through a little bit. Okay, so I can feel it starting to get stuck. So just lift up my foot a little, let it out. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing. Put another clip in, get one more. Okay, and like I said, these clips will just keep moving, and you saw like it sort of pushes forward a little. It's okay. All right. So we're just going to keep going. We'll go along this whole side. So yeah, if you have any questions about this, because this is definitely one that is a little more confusing for people. But once you get the whole binding thing down, it's so easy. And I know quite a few people who will use the Cuddle binding on their cotton quilt. So they use the cotton quilt and like a C3, just the regular Cuddle for the backing. And then we'll use the Luxe Cuddle for the binding. And it makes the most luxurious edge. And they'll wear and wear and wear, and kids love it. I mean, adults love it too, but kids especially.
Kids at heart.
Kids at heart, exactly. Everybody who loves soft stuff. My favorite is when people tell me like, oh, I don't have babies, and so they don't really want the soft stuff. And I'm thinking, there's nobody who doesn't like this stuff. Really, it's just so yummy. So yeah, this is great for both Cuddle quilts or Cuddle blankets like this, but also if you want to back your quilt with Cuddle and then do the binding. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing here into the corner, and I'm going to just stick a pin in here at about 1/2 inch. Okay. That pin looks like it's seen better days. Might be the one that I ran over and killed my last rotary blade with. Okay, so I'm going to sneak up there. Try not to sew on my pin. Take that out before I do. Twist this. And this has a nice little line on mine. A lot of them do, that they'll have a center line, and that's where your needle is. So it makes it really easy to pivot this, put it in the right place. Make sure that your fabric is not getting twisted at all. And sew right off the corner. Okay.
These are the regular size Wonder clips, right?
Yeah, those are just regular ones. Okay. Yeah, we'll use the bigger ones later. Right. I just use the little ones now. You could totally use the bigger ones. I'll show you. These are the big, huge, honking huge guys. So I just use the little ones most of the time. On this next side, let's use the bigger ones and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. So we've got the corner where I've sewn off. I'm going to pull this up so it goes straight up the side. Okay, I'm going to stick a finger here, pull this back, pinch it down. Okay, and then I'll do the same and pin it. Okay, and then I'll pin it from this side to keep it exactly where I want it to. Okay, so it keeps that corner nice and even. All right, so let's use the big clips and let's see what happens. Okay, these are nice because they hold down a bigger area. So if you struggle at all with it moving, this is a great way of doing it. That's because it will hold this whole area flat versus this little area flat. So I found that the bigger clips are especially good when I'm using a really fluffy binding, because or if I have batting in here too, because this ends up being super puffy and it has to hold down more. When I'm using these 3 layers, this is the only puffy one, so it seems to work okay for me just fine. But these bigger ones are good, especially if you have really fluffy fabric. Okay, all right. So we're going to do it again. So we're going to bring it on in here. I'm going to push this underneath the foot. Okay, make sure it's going to get under there all the way. We'll do a little lock stitch and then start moving. Okay. And if I notice that it's pushing forward just a little bit, I'm going to let it. Okay, I'm not going to try to try to force it back too much. I just want to make sure that it's not stretching. That's the biggest issue, is not to have it stretch. Okay, so it can move a little bit like that. I'll just move that forward. Okay, maybe this one will work if I just keep moving it forward like that. Except now that it's bumping up to another one. Okay, and so then I'm going to take this pin that's back here, okay, because this is the place that I want to hold on to when I'm pulling it through. I'm going to keep a hand on this as I pull it, and not really pulling it, but you know, to keep some tension on it. So if I take that pin out now, I'm not going to stab myself, because that is, honest to God, probably my most common thing that I do, is I grab that real hard and then I stab really badly. Okay, get rid of that one. So I think I can just use the one. Okay, and I'm just going to keep that down along the edge. Okay, and I'm going to try to keep it, so you can see everything is over here. Okay, so I'm doing the same thing that I normally do, and that everything is up on the table and then feeds around. Okay. Okay, the other thing you want to make sure is that when you're doing this, that you don't lose one piece that direction, so that your top doesn't get twisted and ends up in another place. Okay, like as in not caught for your binding. Okay, but it's important to keep the weight over here, keep it feeding through evenly that way.
Would you ever use C3 as the binding material? I know you like the Luxe.
You can, yes, you absolutely can. The thing that I prefer the Luxe Cuddle for is when you have a C3 binding. Oh, that's what we used for the puff quilt. And actually, you could show that. You just end up seeing all of the stitches really, really well. So if it doesn't work super well, like you have some goofs, you can totally see the goofs. And so I'm sure you could find some on there that are mine, but you could see all the stitches, and that's what I don't like. So I prefer the Luxe so that I can hide everything. But the C3 works nicely, the flat cuddle works nicely if you want to absolutely show like a fancy stitch. So the serpentine is the one I use the most if I'm doing it with the flat cuddle. You don't want to really use the zigzag because it's just kind of ugly. Because the zigzag isn't actually like a cute stitch at all. And when it's that prominent on it, it's not adorable. Okay, but yes, you can. The answer to the question is you can absolutely use it. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing, aim for the corner. Okay, lift the foot, turn it, and the key really is keeping this straight all the way across, so this whole thing, so this doesn't turn. Okay, I'm not trying to do anything with this tail right now except to keep it straight in the position it was before. Okay, so right off the end, clip the thread and do it again.
I've seen you use Ziggy before as a binding material. It looked like a lot of fun. How do you feel about the dimple?
Dimple is difficult, okay, to say the least. One, it will show your mistakes more because it's like basically a C3, but also dimple has more stretch than the other ones do. So what will happen is you'll end up with it really fighting you to move a lot along those edges. Okay, let me get this. See, I was talking too much and I couldn't concentrate. Okay, so I'm gonna be quiet for just a second. So I want to push this up, hold it, pull it back. I just had to talk about what I was doing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing.
There were two things that you pointed out. Was like on that side where that pin is, there are two edges that match.
Yep, so there's 2 layers.
Yeah.
Okay, well there's actually 3 layers, but there's 2 raw edges. Okay, and then the fold up here needs to end before this raw edge, so I should be able to see that right there. And then I'll pin it in place so it doesn't go anywhere. So once I have it where I want it to be, I'm going to pin it because pins work better to keep it in place, not permanently, but more securely than the clips will. The clips will slide. And right here, I really want that to stay exactly where it is. And you'll notice here, I went right over the seam allowance. I think you guys were looking at the other stuff, and I opened it up. Okay, and I always try to do that. I try to open it up just because it'll be a little bit flatter. All right, so not super important, but a good habit to get into. All right, so then I'll take this back. We'll do it again. Okay. So yeah, the other one I really like is chenille for a binding. Let me see if I have anything. If I have chenille. I don't know that I do. It has a really nice little edging on it. It looks like it's been chenilled, and it's super cute, and I really like it because it makes these little ridges down the side. One of our kit has that in it.
You mentioned a Chenille Cutter earlier, and somebody was
Yes.
asking about that. Is that something
It's an
you would
Olfa.
use?
It's an Olfa tool that Linda uses. I have never used one, but basically it's like a rotary cutter. So it works like this, and then it has a little piece of plastic that goes under here, and so this piece of plastic runs right like along the backing, so the backing actually, it kind of ends up hitting here and just cuts the backing of the fabric. But it looks like this. It's like a weird looking tool, but you have to kind of slide it underneath. I definitely think it's one of those tools that if you use it and you get some practice, it works really well. But we'll take a little bit of practice to get used to how it works. But yeah, that's a Chenille Cutter, and it's an Olfa tool as well. Okay. All right. So you can see, so sometimes this varies over here. Like you can see I'm off my line just a little bit. But like I said, if I'm between the 3/8 and the 1/2 inch, I'm going to be okay. So that's really why I shoot for that 3/8 line, because it gives me a little bit of wiggle room without having to, yeah, I don't have to be too persnickety, and it's still going to work on the other side. Okay. Because that's important. If you get this seam allowance too big, what happens is you don't have the fabric to turn around to the other side to create the binding, and so you end up with a funky looking binding. I'm sure there are people here who know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a really common mistake. Okay, the other thing is if it starts to get off, just stop, go back, restitch it. Okay, don't let it get too far off or you'll get yourself in trouble. Okay. Now we do the same thing. You can see I have a little bit of my selvage edge, okay? It's no big deal because it's well within my 1/2 inch, okay? So I'm not gonna panic about that at all. Okay, the same thing happens if you end up with it being slightly short. As long as it's, you know, within your 1/2 inch, you're all right. Okay, look at that, we're at the last corner. I mean, we have to do the whole thing all over again too, but you know, with the first round's last corner. Okay, so same thing. So right off, think. Okay, then I'm gonna take it over here and do it again. Okay, I'm gonna grab a couple of these pins. Okay. All right, and then we're gonna do it one more time. Same thing. Blade. Okay, flip it up, flip it down. Okay, make sure that those edges, those raw edges match. Okay, so up, back, kind of hold it in place. If this starts to move, I just kind of move it back into where I want it to be. Okay, so if I keep some fingers on it, I can keep it where I want it to be and then manipulate other parts of it. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing here. Pin it again, and then I'm gonna pin it where I want to stop. And that, generally speaking, is going to be where I started. So same, I'm going to give myself a little bit more of a gap with this one. But usually what I do is, because I gave myself a very short tail here, so normally my tail would be like here, and then I would stop sewing. So that I give myself, I want to say about 8 inches. Is that true? Yeah, about 8-inch gap. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pin here. Okay, so that's where I want to stop sewing so that I have a big enough gap that I can sew this down and it won't be too difficult. Okay, I'm going to put a pin through all the layers. The blue is probably going to have to shift because it will have grown just a tiny bit. But this will give me some room for my tails down here to put these together. All right.
How much extra binding length do you account for each mitered corner?
I have no idea. I have never counted precisely, and I think part of it is because there's there's stretch in the fabric. So you'll see like this one has moved a bit. Some others, like when I use the chenille, it doesn't budge. So the backing on that one is a lot more stable. So really it's going to depend on the fabric that you use and how much it wants to grow on you. Because some of them will grow more than others. So yeah, sorry, no idea. I know there is a formula that works for cotton, but cotton is a whole different beast. Okay, so you can see this is how much it's pushed forward. Okay. Okay, this isn't a big deal. If I had a lump that was more like this, we'd be in trouble. Something's stretching. This little bit, it's totally fine. Okay, it was maybe like 1/4 of an inch or something. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch here.
If you noticed it stretching like that, that'd be a presser foot adjustment? Maybe?
Yeah, you would want to lighten up your presser foot pressure so that it wasn't pushing so far. Because what happens is when this pushes down harder, it pushes this way. It stretches it. So if your presser foot pressure is down, it will do that. It will stretch it for you. And that's not what we want. We want to pull it up so it slides through. Okay, that's really important. The other thing is that's when I might put more pins in so that I could sort of make it work with the stiletto. I could sort of force it underneath to keep it even and not let it stretch at all. So that was when I would manipulate the fabric a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now we've gotten to this part. Okay. So this is the part that always freaks me out a little bit because I have my way of doing it, which I'm going to show you. That usually freaks everybody else out. But I find it really easy to do. But there's a different way of doing it that's like a quilting technique that I usually get fairly right, but we're going to try. Every time it scares me. And scares me mostly because I don't have it completely in my head. So I don't always get it perfectly right. Okay, so fair warning. I might get this wrong the first time. But not the first time I do it my way. Okay, so this is my way, all right, which is a weird way. And I will grant you that it is weird and takes a little bit of practice, okay? But what I have are these two ends that are coming together. So the cheap and easy way of doing it is getting these to just bind like this, stitch it together, okay? What happens with that is you end up with a pretty big bulk right there and you get a weird seam. So if you really struggle, that is a way that you can do it, is to just combine these. I like to do it with a 45 because I don't get so much thickness. If I do it this way, I have a seam here, and then another seam over here that makes that part a really big bump. If I do it with a 45, I have a bump here and a bump here, okay? And then a bump around. So what I want to do is make sure that I don't have so much thickness, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold this at a 45. Because that's how I want my seam to go, is at a 45-degree angle, okay? This one I want to go at a 45-degree angle too, obviously, so they could sew together, and it needs to go the opposite direction, so these could be sewn together here, okay? This will become my seam. The weird thing that I do is that I don't let them touch because it's bulky and they're stretchy, so I can make it fit. So I let it have a gap, which you can see, okay? Then I hold it down with my fingers. Then I take my little pin, okay, so here's just my regular old, slightly bent. I'm going to get a better one, okay, throw out your bent pins, okay, so I'm going to get a nice clover pin here. I'm going to stick it underneath, okay, so it's underneath this little fold. I'm going to stick it under here, stick it out through the fold. I'm going to grab this fold, fold this up. Pin it. Okay, so now I've pinned those two together. See that? It's like I've sewn it together, except it's just a pin. Okay, now I know exactly where I want to sew it though, because this will work. I can see it'll lay down flat. It totally works. Okay, so then what I do is then I'm going to gather this up so I can move this and still have it lay flat. Okay, so now I know this is where I want it to be and this is where I want to sew. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to pin it on either side of where I pinned that. So you can see that it gets a little bit funky because of pinning it through the fold. So after I get one in there, I'm going to take this one out. I'm going to repin this. But I always have at least one pin in because otherwise I'll get lost. Okay, so now I know I can sew from here to here and that'll fit. So we're actually going to do this, and I'm going to take stitches out and show you the different ways of doing it. Okay, because this is a short little seam. So now we're going to sew this and I'll show you how it lays flat. Okay. Okay, so this is one of those situations where I'm going to use the needle. I'm going to put the needle down. Okay, and I'm going to slide this right up into that corner. Okay, and I'm going to make sure, so look over this way, Hawk, so they can see this. So all of this gets real weird right here because we're trying to get all of this up here so that I can lay my binding down flat. Okay, so if you have a longer area to do that with, it's better. So that's why I'm saying, like, if you have 8 or 10-inch tails, it'll be easier than if you have 4-inch tails, okay? Because it gives you more space to do that. Okay, normally we would backstitch this, but I know I'm going to take it out, so I'm not going to backstitch it. Okay, so now I've sewn between those 2 pins. I'm going to take the pins out. Okay, make sure that it lays flat. Yep, totally works in there. Then I would cut off those tails, sew the rest of the way, okay? But let me show you the other way. Okay, did that make sense? If you've got questions, please pop them up, and I'll answer them while I'm, oh, look at that, the stitches just come right out. Okay, all right, so I'm just gonna pull those threads, ta-da. All right. Okay, so now lay it out again.
Well, the back stitching does a lot of work, huh?
Yeah, yes, it really holds it in place. That's why it is important, right? Because I can't do that at all here. Yeah, the back stitching held it. Okay, oops. Okay, so now we have this, and now I have this technique, which is the one that scares me. So I wish I had a real quilter buddy here with me. Okay. So this is the one that a lot of people use when they're using cotton. So we have the 2 pieces that we have. If I have to remember. Okay, I'm gonna have to do it and try to remember, you guys. So we lay the 2 pieces over each other. Oops, throw a piece on the floor. No, not really. Okay, now this piece is as wide as this. So this is just this piece turned this way. Okay. And that's how you can measure it. You could also, you know, get yourself a pin and measure it too, or the ruler and measure it too. Okay, so now I have to think through this because you measure it on either side of this. Some quilter's going to pop it and be like, "You're doing it wrong." I'll be like, "I know, I never could get this right." Okay, now let me think. I have to work it through, you guys. Hold up. Then if we stitch that here, hold up. I'll explain it again once I figure it out. Yeah, that works. Okay. So basically what I do, okay, so we're gonna lay this out. Sorry, I told you I don't use this technique. I know other people who do, but I do not. Okay, so this is our piece. That's the width of, okay? And I pin on one side and pin on the other. The thing that happens, this works really well with cotton because cotton doesn't do the weird things that Cuddle does. So one of the things that I've noticed, so if you're familiar with this technique, you can totally do this. If you do this with your cotton quilts. If you're a newbie, don't do it this way because it's hard. Or watch the other tutorials that people really know what they're doing. The thing that happens is because it's Cuddle, it stretches. So I always make this a shorter. So this is going to make this section shorter, okay, as if I move that pin, because I actually don't want it to be the same size, because look, I could stretch these and make them much closer, which I don't want to do, okay? I want them to be a little bit apart. So then what I do is I have this pin, so this was the width apart, plus a little bit of extra, and then if I remember right, they go like this. So this pin bumps up to that selvage, this pin bumps up to that selvage. Somebody telling me I'm wrong yet? Okay. I'm waiting for it. Okay. I'm going to push that, see if that worked. Look at that. It looks like it'll work. Ta-da! Okay. So I always pin it first because I used to be, when I first started quilting, I was really good at getting these twisted. So there'd be a twist in it, and yeah, as somebody said, I'd be really good at getting the twist in it. So I always pin it and then lay it out, and I'm like, okay, that worked, I can sew it. The twist is really, really easy to do. So if you pin it first, you're gonna like avoid that mistake. So now I've got it pinned where I want it to be. So I'm gonna do the same thing where I take this pin, this is where I want to sew it. But I obviously don't want to put my pin where I'm going to sew it. I want to put my pins next to it so I can sew down that line. Okay, and have it be in the right place, but not have a pin in there. Okay, so now I'm going to sew it from here to here. So this is also one of those places that you could mark this with your ruler if you want to, and or not if you want to. So now we're going to do it this way. I pinned it. It should work. If it doesn't, we're going to take out some back stitching because we're going to back stitch this one. We're going to pretend I got it right. So that first way where I fold them and then pin in between, that seems to work really well for me. It just takes a little bit of practice, and just do it a few times. You'll figure it out, I promise. Also, if you watch any of the other videos, I show it a million times too. Okay, so I back stitched. I'm aiming for this corner right over there. Doop, doop. Okay, back stitch. Okay, and then again, we're going to check it, make sure it worked. All right, because if you're like me, you've done it, you thought it was going to work, then you did it and it didn't work. Okay, this totally did. I have to see it's going to work just fine. If you end up, so I see that this isn't really tight, and I know that this fabric liked to stretch, right? When I worked all the way around, it liked to stretch. So I think that if I sew on this side, this is going to stretch and I'm going to end up with a little bit of a bulk over here. So I'm going to show you what to do about that. First, I'm going to trim this. Okay, and I'm going to use my little scissors here so I can kind of go behind it and just cut the backing fabric. So I have a little bit less of a mess to deal with. Okay, and you can see I kind of cut off the dog ear there. Okay, so just little clips. I'm just trying to get the backing fabric. I'm going to cut that off. Okay, now it will lay down in there nice and flat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pin this, because like I said, if we want the fabric to stay where we want it to stay, we're going to pin it. Okay, if I give it clips, it has some room to move, and we don't want it to move right now. So I pinned this so it's opened, okay, and then I pinned just a couple of places here so that I make sure that this doesn't move as I stitch it down. Okay, I want it to stay right along the edge. I want those raw edges to match. Okay, I'm going to shove that down just a little. Okay, I want the raw edges to match, and I want it to stay where it's going to stay. So this time I'm going to sew it from this side, and I'm just going to work through it slowly and make sure that that back part here doesn't stretch at all. Because if this is against the feed dog, it's going to go through more evenly than if this is on the top. Okay, so this is what I do whenever it's a stretchier fabric or if it's a little bit loose. Okay, and it'll feed it in much better. So then I'm just going to go up here to where I was stitching before. I'm going to find where I started up there. Oops. Okay, and I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm just going to go back over this spot. So I'm going to do a little lock stitch, get myself in place, and I'm going to fold this, make sure it's nice and flat, even, and then I'm just going to sew right along here. And those feed dogs are going to make sure that that blue fabric doesn't go anywhere. Okay, the thing with doing the blue on the bottom the entire way around is I actually have less control of moving it. So unless I want to pin it really hard like this, it's going to move on me. So I only really want to do this for a short period because it just requires more pinning, and I don't want that. But it will move around on the back more, and you can't really tell what it's doing back there. So like I'm going to stick my hand back here, get that out nice and flat. So it's just a little harder to control when it's on the other side, except for here, and I can get it to control in a way that it won't let it pucker at all. Okay. All right. So now we'll turn it over. We'll check it out. Close enough. Good stuff. I can see that this moved just a little bit. Do you see how my seam allowance got smaller right there than it was here? Okay, and that's because the blue fabric moved, and that's just one of the things, and I can tell my other fabric ends up here. So even with the pinning, it did that. Okay, so what's going to happen is when this comes around, I'll have to make sure that I'm careful with it right there, and that it is stays fairly even. Okay, not a big deal, but it's just one of the things that when those things happen to you, it's just something that happens. Okay, but like I was saying, I have less control over the blue fabric, the it's not necessarily that it's blue, but it's the fluffy fabric. So the Luxe, I have less control of that strip of binding when it's on the reverse side. So it has more ability to move back and forth. It did help it so that it doesn't pucker. Because if you get that other side where it puckers, you get a little pleat in there. You can leave it if it's small enough. If it's big, you want to take it out and then fix it. And nobody really wants to do that. Okay. All right. So now we're going to stitch the binding down. What are we doing with time? Oh, we're doing all right. Okay. So now I'll show you how to do this. Okay. So I always start up at a corner. Okay. And you can see my stitching line. Look at that. I nailed it, man. So right along the 1/2 inch line. Okay. So we measured it. And then we got the stitching line right across there. So even though I was aiming for like between the 3/8 and a half, that's what I ended up getting. Okay. So I'm so proud of that. It's really good.
Wow.
Yeah. I nailed that baby. So we just like stitch right along here. So then what's going to happen is we're going to bring this around. So I start up at a corner. Okay. I bring it around. I'm going to do a little clip. Okay. I'm going to do a few more little clips here. Okay. And this is definitely something that we're just going to work our way around. So we're going to get to the corner and I'll show you how to do the corner. And then I want to talk about the other one really quick. Okay. A slightly different way of doing this. Okay. So I've got this clip down. I'm going to stick this underneath my machine and I'm going to put my foot down. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change my zigzag. Okay. So I'm going to get it to a zigzag and it's a 5 and a 5. I'm going to leave this on my gray thread, right? Oops, sorry. I'm going to leave it on my gray thread right now just so you guys can see it. Truthfully, this would be a place that I would probably change it to the blue thread just so that it would perfectly match and I wouldn't have to, while stitching, like while I can fluff up the stitches and it won't show, it's nicer to just not have to fluff up the stitches. Okay. All right. So now we've got a zigzag going. So what I'm going to do is I need to get this raw edge that you can see to go right along that stitching line. So I can sort of feel it because this is where the thick part is. And I'm just going to kind of get it to go over there and hold it down. And I want that zigzag. So when it comes down on the left, it's coming down right off the blue. Okay. And I'm just going to do this where I just hold it a little bit at a time. Make sure it's there. And stitch it. Okay, and I'm just going to work my way across the whole blanket like that. So the binding is definitely a part that takes longer because I want to be careful with it. Okay, so generally speaking, when we're in classes and we do like the Wee One quilt, which is a 27-inch quilt, the binding usually takes at least 2 hours in class. Okay, so when you're doing it, give yourself plenty of time to do this. I like this project because really the only hard part of it is the binding. So it's one that's a pretty easy one to tackle. And even though it takes a little while, it's really not too long and it's definitely faster than hand stitching a binding. So there's that. Okay. Make sure that that's pulled over. Okay, but it's something, give yourself the time to do it. Don't do it when you have, you know, the baby shower is in a half an hour because you'll be frustrated. Okay, that's when you do the Luxe row where you just do the top stitching. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going along here. Nice and easy. And you can see, like, yeah, there's nothing about this that's a hurry. Okay, just going to take my time, get it as nice as possible. And then once I'm done, I'll go back over, especially because I'm using gray thread on this, and fluff it. Okay, so this stiletto, this is the reason, honestly, it's this task that makes it the tool to win. Okay, because I can grab this, I can stick it exactly where I want it, and I can just hold it there. Okay, so I'm going to come up here, make sure it's in the right spot, and just aim. Okay, and because I know I stuck so I have my stiletto here, okay? I stuck it in the right spot of where I want it to be. So I know I want it to stay there, and that's my edge. So that's what I'm aiming for. So visually, I'm just aiming for the tip of the stiletto because I know that that's in the space that I want it to be. So I don't look at this fluff that's over on the side because that can get confusing. Okay, so that is one thing that is easier with the C3, the Cuddle, the flat Cuddle, is because it's really easy to see that edge. but it also means that your stitches are really easy to show. Okay, so now when we get to the corner, we're going to work our way over here, and then I'm going to do a little bit of finagling. Okay, so to get these corners really nice, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this here. Okay, so I just pinned that in place where I want it to be, so it'll keep coming down straight. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold this up. Okay, and then I'm going to pin that here. Okay, so I'm going to hold that in place, and I'm going to hold it this direction too. Okay, so they are coming down together, and then I'm going to hold this over here. Whoa. Stiletto down. Point down. Can you show? This is the hilarious thing about my floor. Like, this happens all the time. Things just end up like just stuck in the floor. This cracks me up.
That fatigue mat. Oh, also nice slippers.
Yeah, thanks. My daughter gave them to me years ago. They're well worn. So I'm just going to pin all of this. But yes, my needle ended up in the floor earlier. I had scissors in the floor. Now my stiletto. So I've got this pinned, okay, and clipped in all the places that I want it to be. And I'm just going to be really careful when I get up to this corner, okay, that I'm not going to sew over any pins, but I'm going to catch all that down. So one of the things that's really great about the Luxe Cuddle is that it will hide all of your mistakes, and this corner doesn't have to be perfect. So I leave these this pins in as long as I absolutely can. Okay, I'm going to leave that needle down, pivot it. Okay, and then what I want to do is, so you can see my needle is in the right side. So what I want to do is aim it so that when it comes, it's going to come right off the left side of this fabric. So I'm actually going to hand crank it just a couple to make sure it's landing where I want it to. Okay. And then I'm going to take my stiletto and help it through. Okay, so you'll notice that a lot of times at the corner, it'll get a little bit bogged down, and that's just because it's a lot of fabric. So using a stiletto or like one of these, the stronger clover pins, if you stick that in the side and kind of pull it through, it'll help get over those corners, because the corners can be a bit much. Okay, so that's a nice segue. I'm going to go a little bit further down here. Okay, we're going to do that for every corner, this same thing. Okay, so now I'm going to take this out. Ta-da! Okay, so there you can see, because I have the gray, you can see the stitches really well. Okay, I say really well, and I'm still like, oh, where are they? You can see them in there somewhere. Okay, so this comes around, held it all down. This mitered corner just becomes a big fluff ball that doesn't really seem mitered. Okay, but I can also do this with my stiletto, and I can pull all the stitches up and over, and you'll never see the gray thread. Okay, so I would still use it as a I would still use the blue thread if I were doing this for somebody, because I would want to not have to do all that fluffing. But it's nice that even if you forget, usually what I forget is I'll change the top thread into navy and then forget the bottom thread, and then the bottom thread will be in gray, and I'm like, great. I think that's actually what I did with the other one too. I'm really good at that. Okay, so the other thing I wanted, so the corners are the part that are hard for people. Okay, once you figure it out, and especially if you quilt with cotton, it's kind of, it's the same but different. Okay, but what I do want to show you is a different way that you can do it. So if the corners are really sort of baffling for you and you're having a difficult time with it, you can make yourself a square little blanket. Take yourself a little kitchen plate. Okay, take it up to the corner, and then you're just going to cut that baby off. Okay, so what I like to do is I sort of like to get this so I can see 4 inches and 4 inches. That's where I want to aim for. Okay. Okay, so now I've got a rounded corner on my blanket, and I'm just going to switch all the way around that. So when I'm doing the binding, you're never going to do the mitered thing. You're just going to go around the entire blanket that way. The mitered corner way is a more professional way of making it look, but this is super easy and a very good way of practicing the binding. Okay, so this, another way of doing it. Any questions on that? And literally, like, this is it's a cute little sewing plate. Is that the right way up? But this is like a what do you call this, Hawk? Ceramic? A ceramic plate? Porcelain maybe, like a heavy plate. That's what you want to use, is something that has some weight on it. So don't use like a plastic kid's plate because it will want to slide on it. So something that has some oomph to hold it down, or put something heavy on it, because as you're cutting around it, it can cause you issues. Oh, somebody wanted to show
the back of that binding now that it's basically done.
Yes. Oh, this is the one that I didn't, that's the one I did before. So here's the one that I just did. Okay. So here we go. So this is what it looks like. So this, I can just kind of fluff over it, and all of those stitches sort of just hide away. Okay, but what happens is that this gets stitched right along that edge. So this is the seam right here, and then here's my zigzag. Okay, so you could do this the other direction, where, you know, you stitched it down from that side and this would be your front, but I have a harder time getting this to be perfect. There'll be times that it definitely will come off and not be as nice. So like here, I stitched into the red a little bit. Okay, so that'll happen sometimes. So that's why I stitch it to the front, because I can make sure that this looks really nice because I'm staring at it as I'm sewing. Okay, and this one you can see that raw edge, and it's not super pretty, but if I fluff this, it all comes over. Okay, very nice. And this is what it looked like after it was washed and dried. Like I said, at a commercial laundromat, because that's what we do. Okay, oops, sorry. Yeah, so you can see that's the back. So that's how much came out of it, out of the stitches with it just being washed. So I didn't fluff any of these stitches. They just sort of stick down in there a little bit. So if I really wanted to, yeah, so this is the navy stitches. So I did the same thing here, where I did the navy on this side and the gray on the other, because I forgot to change the bobbin. See, told you guys. Really good at that. This is the other one that I was telling you about for the binding that I really like, is the chenille. So this, I think this is a version of the chenille, but it has these lines in it, which when it becomes the binding is like this. And it's super cute. I really like these bindings. I can't remember which kit is it that uses it for a binding, but I really like it. That was we did that kit in a class, and I was like, oh, I really like that. So those are my favorites. There's more tips on our blog post. Okay, so are there any other questions that I didn't get? Okay, the other thing I would suggest, and we've talked about binding before, so I know this is about making that little blanket, So Simple blanket. You can get it on our website. The other thing that I've suggested that you can do is that you could make a small one like this and then bind it, and practice that a few times, and then just cut off the wonky binding and bind it again until you get a smaller blanket. But practicing that binding will make it easier. So it becomes a thing where you're like, oh, I get it now. The first couple times are going to be harder. This kit is also what we use, or this style blanket is actually what we use in our, gosh, the name is going to go away from me now. It's a little bunny kit that we have that it's a cute panel on one side, and then you put a print on the other, and then it has the binding, which is a purple little binding. That's a kit that you can get. And then we have one that's called Read to Me that has a super cute little cuddle book, which we also have a video on how to make that cuddle book. But that blanket that's in the kit is done just like this. Okay, super duper easy. It's like the best way to throw together a gift or make yourself something to keep you warm. Okay, so we have a winner. All right, our winner for this week is Melissa GB of San Antonio, Texas. So congratulations, Melissa. I have a whole other set of fabric that I will send you so you can make a little blanket just like this. You'll get a little bit more fabric than I used today. We are back next week. Oh, I almost forgot. We are back next week. We're doing something special. I'm very excited about it. So we're bringing in a guest next week via Zoom, and we're going to learn about embroidery. So I've told you before, I got an embroidery machine at the beginning of our little stay-home orders. So back, I think, in March or April, I got an embroidery machine, and I've learned to use it just a little bit, but I know there's so much to learn, and I haven't had the time to do all of the learning that I want to do. So I invited one of our brand ambassadors, and she's going to be with me, like I said, via Zoom, via Facebook Live, and we're gonna blend it together, and she's going to teach me how to make a really cute little zippered pouch with some embroidery on it, all on the machine, in the hoop, with the Cuddle. It's going to be great. So I am excited about doing that next week. So you're going to learn alongside me. We're going to learn together on how to do embroidery with Cuddle. So if you have questions, we'll definitely be doing that, because I'm going to be asking a million questions, because I don't know what I'm doing in that regard. So I'm excited about that. We're going to kind of learn together for that Sew Together Tuesday next week. So until then, again, congratulations on winning, and thanks so much for joining me again for Sew Together Tuesday. Until next week, happy sewing.